Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building. In the last hour, we spoke to Daniel Kaluuya. And now we have the producer and director of Judas and the Black Messiah. We have Shaka King. Good morning, brother.
Morning.
Well, first of all, congratulations on this movie. They're already talking about Oscars and all of that. Does that matter to you?
No.
Why not?
Because we don't need white validation. Tell them, Shaka.
because when I first, started, not even when I first started, honestly, for like my duration up until now, I've found Hollywood to be, as racist as, the rest of this country. I would say that my experiences, I went to school, I'm from Brooklyn, I went to school in Bay Ridge.
Me too.
As Angela, can attest to that experience, like I had cops making monkey sounds to me when I was in 7th grade. You know what I mean? Nothing compares though to the experience of racism I experienced in Hollywood, as an adult. And so when you go through that, as I have, at least my reaction to it was to kind of recognize that Hollywood wasn't a meritocracy and that, I couldn't measure my success based upon, whether, a white male dominant industry recognized me as talented. And so even though it's taken literally years of deprogramming for me to get to a place where I don't invest in that stuff, while I recognize that, it would be good for my career, it would make things easier to get made. And there's always going to be a part of you that wants to, just be appreciated and have your work appreciated, especially by people you respect. At the same time, I can't sacrifice my power that way anymore,
I agree with you, but I think this film is phenomenal. And even though I totally agree with you with everything you're saying about, receiving validation from these award shows, these white male-dominated award shows, I want y'all to win all the awards because I don't know what else quantifies success. I want y'all to make all the money, win all the awards, because I know if that happens, more of these films will be made.
I think this year in particular is one where I've had to sort of work through that just because, normally you have the box office to prove whether a movie is a success. And because everything is going to be streaming and in theaters at the same time, you don't have the box office to determine whether it's something successful. So this is an instance where, a lot of emphasis is going to be placed on awards to determine whether a movie did well. And I recognize that, this movie literally stands on the shoulders of Black Panther. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we don't even get a meeting if, Ryan wasn't coming off the success of that film. And my hope is that, films like this lead to more films about more revolutionaries across the globe. So in that regard, I do, who doesn't want that? You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, just on a personal level, I can't allow myself to get too invested in, what the industry says about the film. It just wouldn't be good for my psyche,
And this is a different kind of movie from things that you've done in the past too. Obviously we know you're from Brooklyn, so you've done, pro works that actually revolve around Brooklyn and your experiences here. But I think one thing that people don't understand is they think this movie is mostly about Fred Hampton, like he's the main character, but it's really the informant, William O'Neill, who's the main character in this movie, correct?
Well,
I mean, I think it's really like a two-hander.
Talk about how the film came about before you break it down. Like, how did you even do this film?
Sure. Well, it came to me from the Lucas brothers, comedy duo, friends of mine.
Brilliant brothers.
And brilliant guys. And they reached out to me and they were like, look, we want to make a movie about William O'Neill and Fred Hampton that we see as the departed set inside the world of COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO being the FBI's counterintelligence program that was designed by J. Edgar Hoover to crush, anyone that he deemed dissident. And so I just thought that was a brilliant concept I thought it was really, quite frankly, the only way you'd ever have a movie made about Fred Hampton. And the truth of the matter is that, you know, when you're talking about making a period film, a movie that takes place in 1968, 69 with that kind of scope, you can only make it at a studio just because it's going to cost a certain amount of money. It's just going to require that, you know? And so when they pitched it to me, I was just like, yeah, this is brilliant. I can see it. I see this as an opportunity to put forth not just this history, but this great man's ideas and this great organization's ideas that I think are just as applicable to the world we live in today, in a piece of pop culture that travels across the globe and that entertains people. And they could, you know, as Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. says, you know, put the medicine in the applesauce. You know what I mean?
Now, I know Fred Hampton's family had been approached. Well, no, you asked the question before him. Wait, what was the question?
Yeah, I was asking a question about just making this, because I saw some critiques of it and people saying, talking about Fred Hampton and how they didn't feel like his character was developed enough and they didn't show this. But this really was more about William O'Neill. And obviously Fred Hampton was a huge part in why William O'Neill, we're focused on him. But can you just break that down and why it was more told from that point of view?
Well, I don't think it's actually told really. To me, it's more of a two-hander. It's like Heat more than it is, you know, a movie where it's told through O'Neill's POV. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it's like, I think that people think that because we use this interview that William O'Neill gave to Eyes on the Prize 2, we recreate the interview and then, you know, I'm not going to spoil it, but the interview plays a role in the film, even though it's not in the film a ton. But I think because of that structure, people think that the movie is from O'Neill's perspective. But the truth of the matter is that when you're looking at Fred, he's most of the time independent of O'Neill, and it's actually from Deborah Johnson's perspective. That's when you really get a sense of who he is. And so the reason we chose to make it a two-hander, I mean, was because we literally, the framing device that we first thought of, and it's changed as we made the thing, was The Departed in the World of COINTELPRO. That was how we were going to get the movie made. That was how we were going to get the movie out there. I think from a political perspective, the reason to kind of make it a two-hander and lean into that is that you have an opportunity to present almost like two poles of humanity. You know what I mean? You have in Fred Hampton, one of the bravest, most courageous people of all time. You have in William O'Neill, you know, one of the most biggest cowards we could think of in history. You know, you have in Fred Hampton someone who was interested in building coalitions. You have in William O'Neill a pure individualist. You know, in Fred Hampton you have a Marxist. You know, you have a socialist. In William O'Neill you have a capitalist, and you have this opportunity to explore, you know, just almost like these two different poles of humanity. Let me pause this for a second because my mom is calling me and I need to tell her not to call me.
Please, you gotta answer the phone for mom. You gotta answer the phone.
Is that a house phone?
So you're talking about, you know, in Fred Hampton, you have a socialist, in a Marxist. In William O'Neill, you have, you know, a pure capitalist. You know what I mean? And so to me, you have this opportunity to really like look at these two people who exist on kind of, you know, two different poles of humanity and kind of explore that. And I think in some ways, you know, if we did our job correctly, you as a viewer can kind of watch this movie and even subconsciously question, like, where do I fit, you know, along that like spectrum? Like everyone wants to believe that they would be Fred Hampton. But the truth of the matter is that there are a lot more William O'Neills in this world than there are Fred Hamptons. And, you know, it's kind of a lost opportunity to just like make this guy just like a cartoon villain. When, you know, he was an 18-year-old guy who made like some really bad decisions and some really bad choices. Like, yo, how many people do we know in prison right now? And they're in prison because someone, you know, told on them.
Yes,
you know
you are so right. So many more people would be like, I'm not going to jail. I am telling it. What y'all need me to do so I don't got to go to jail. And that's just.
I mean, even look at how he got seduced. He got seduced. Like it starts with the way that they do it is they go, listen, you don't know this guy. Just go and tell me what you hear. You don't just see what you hear. If you hear something, tell me. And then they start paying them.
Here's some money. Here's a drink. Here's a cigar. Have a good time.
And they just start roping you in. you know?
I think it was a great balance. Y'all did a great job of humanizing both of them. I didn't feel like y'all focused solely on William, and I knew exactly what William O'Neill was about, and I knew exactly what Fred Hampton was about. And the reason you know that is because you get an emotional connection with Fred, and especially in that last scene when they raid the apartment, I'm screaming at the TV like, "Wake up, Fred! Grab the goddamn pistol! Wake up!" So I think y'all did. I think y'all did a great job. I don't think y'all focused solely on one or the other.
I don't either. I mean, it was a balance that I know we didn't, because I've seen cuts where we did. You know what I mean? There were edits where we did, and we screened it for people, and we got that feedback like, yo, you're leaning too heavily on O'Neill, you know?
Yeah, because I think some people thought it was a biopic about Fred Hampton, from what I was understanding, but it's really not.
No, and that was never, I mean, the truth of the matter is that, you know, if you were to go into any studio and say, I want to make a biopic about Fred Hampton, they'd be like, who? He didn't, until this movie, he probably doesn't have that kind of name recognition in Hollywood. The fact of the matter is, there's not a Rosa Parks biopic. There's not a Joe Louis biopic. It's not like Hollywood is clamoring to make movies about Black historical figures that are ubiquitous across the world, let alone folks like Fred Hampton, who, the truth of the matter is, there are a lot of folks in our community who've heard the name growing up, but they don't know who he was. You know, a lot of people are more familiar. I could say even myself, when I first signed on to the project, I was way more aware of how he died than I was aware of the work he'd done when he was alive. You know, so the truth of the fact is, like, I would love for this movie to do well. Like, one of the goals with this movie was, if this movie does well and Fred Hampton becomes a household name, then maybe someone will make a limited series about his life from soup to nuts. But I think a lot of times people who are critical of us even taking this approach, you know, they're kind of not thinking big picture wise, in my opinion, personally, just in terms of the role of art in social movements and social, like, does art exist? The idea is that people watch this movie and they go to their phones and they buy The Assassination of Fred Hampton. You know, they go on YouTube and look up his speeches. They do a deeper dive into him, his politics, and the organization's politics. You know, you make movies about icons to humanize icons, so that you elevate their sacrifice, and you make superhuman beings human beings, so that human beings watch them and are inspired by them and want to learn more about them. The alternative is like, yeah, we could have not made this movie. You know what I mean? But how would that be useful? You know, in my opinion.
How hard was it to get funding?
Well, we had Charles King, one of our producers, putting up half the budget.
Macro.
Macro's, you know, shout out to Charles, shout out to Macro. That was unheard of, quite frankly. But it was still challenging to get the studios to sign on. The only studio that was interested in meeting our price point was Warner Brothers. And thank God, because I mean, you know, it's like, it's not a complaint. It's like, you know, complain about the Yankees drafting me. You know what I mean?
How difficult was it as far as research is concerned? Because we was just talking to Daniel, we were just talking about it in school. You know, you don't really learn much about the Panthers and the things that they've done, especially in New York. You know, they teach you Martin Luther King and then a little bit of Malcolm X, and then that's pretty much it. So how deep was the research, and how much research did you have to do?
A ton. I read a bunch of books. This bookcase is full of books I read. I got more books in that room there. I mean, there's literature out there. A lot of it, though, I hate to call it misinformation, because that's not accurate, but there's no substitute for the oral history that you get when you speak to people who were on the ground there. Because, you know, and it makes sense when you think about it. This is an organization that many members went underground after the events of December 4th. And they're not very open to talking to outsiders. So a lot of time when academics have come around and wanted to write books about, you know, what happened and about the organization, a lot of members are, you know, not interested in sharing that information. And so there's what's printed, and it's a great foundation, but there's no substitute for, if you can get some of those elders to talk a little bit about their experience, there's no substitute for that.
I know. Fred Hampton's family had been approached to do a movie on his life quite a few times. How were y'all able to convince them?
I think it was a number of things. I think a big factor was timing, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Just I think that the biggest, I think, honestly, was Ryan. Because when Ryan and Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. met, there was a clear connection between the two of them. They bumped into each other in Oakland 10 years before Ryan was even, I think Ryan was in grad school maybe. And Chairman was in Oakland handing out flyers. And they remembered one another, over a several second encounter, after several second encounter. And there was just a bond, I think, that formed there, where Chairman could tell, like, this is a really good brother, and I think, also the family recognized just the opportunity afforded us, just where we were at as a culture, the fact that, Ryan was coming off this massive successful film, and that this would be an opportunity for this story to get to a wide audience and this information to get to a wide audience. It took about a year and change of conversations, them getting to know us, getting to trust us, doing background checks on us, rightfully so. Us having incredibly difficult conversations about, the fact that this was not going to be completely historically accurate, and us really negotiating and talking about, the changes that we could make that would accommodate them, and, the changes we couldn't make. And I mean, this was a process that continued through the shoot, through the edit process. And it helped me stretch as an artist, because, there's a difference between, reading a script and then seeing it come to life in front of you, especially when you haven't read screenplays before. Chairman had read the script maybe 3-4 times, but it was real different when he saw the actors in front of him. And sometimes he'd be like, we got to do this different. This can't be this way. And I would have to, in the moment, adjust and figure out a way to accommodate what he was asking me to do, but also accommodate myself and the goals that the production had laid forth. So it was tricky. Finding those points of interest was tricky, but it was worthwhile.
I would love to see, Ryan and, yourself, as you said, do some type of limited series on the Panthers. Because I asked Daniel the same question. The Black Panthers have been so misconstrued. They've been compared to the KKK in recent times. So did you feel pressure to portray them correctly?
Not pressure, just responsibility. Mm-hmm. It was the whole reason for making the movie. It was recognizing that this, to me, I call this movie a counter propaganda film in a lot of ways, because there's been put forth so much propaganda about the Panthers. Even those of us who love them know so much more about their militancy and their fashion than the community organizing and all the work they did in terms of building medical clinics, feeding children, busing families to prisons to visit their loved ones, clothing drives, fighting against slumlords. I mean, it's just like they were basically doing the job that the government is supposed to be doing. And so, yeah, we definitely wanted to correct the record in that regard.
Do you think the TV and film industry is going to change permanently moving forward after this pandemic?
I think it's so tough to say, because the pandemic is shifting everything. I think people are going to wear masks the rest of their lives, even after the vaccine. I'm not getting on the train without a mask.
I am.
I'm not getting on the train without a mask. You know what I'm saying? So I think everything's different after this pandemic, and definitely TV and film will be affected. I don't know what that will look like, but it's going to be different for sure.
Do you think it's more important for white people to see this movie or black people?
I think it's important for everyone to see it. I made it for my first people I made it for was for black people. There's certain decisions. I mean, every decision, but there's some specific decisions in my, even like how we framed the assassination, that it was very clear, okay, we're not going to show, this man getting shot in the head. I'm not going to put us through that. There were decisions that, there was a desire at one point, not on my part, to start the movie with, the J. Edgar Hoover sequence that you see fairly early in the film. And I was like, yo, we can't start the movie with J. Edgar Hoover talking about the Panthers. We have to let the Panthers speak for themselves, you know? And so, yeah, I would say that was who I made it for, but I also did certain things. There's certain pieces in the movie that I made for white people, like the character of Roy Mitchell and how I shaped that character. I made that specifically for white people because I wanted them to understand the shortcomings of being a white centrist. You know what I mean? Like that's not actually true allyship. And this whole idea of decency and all that jazz, it's just performative. It's hollow, you know, like a centrist will shoot you in the head and you know, 2 years later, try to name a city block after you. You know what I mean?
That's real. I wondered because you know the movie made me wonder about the relationship between Huey P. Newton and Fred Hampton, and I also wondered, did Angela Davis see this? Did y'all screen it for Angela Davis?
I know that she asked to see it, and we provided a link, but I haven't. We were supposed to actually do a panel today, and she's under the weather, so it's not going to happen. But I don't know yet. I hope she has. But a bunch of Illinois chapter members have seen it. A lot more are seeing it. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for it.
How long does it take to research a movie like this? Like, just so people know the whole process, because it's not just writing a script and going into it. How much goes into research?
It was like, I mean, truthfully now, like 3 years of research, 3 to 4 years of research. You know, it's a 4-year process to get it to the screen. And I was still doing, I was doing research up until when we were in Cleveland. So I'd say 4 years. I'd say 4 years, probably.
Aside from sharing the life and legacy of Fred Hampton, what message do you want this movie to send?
There's a billion, you know, like, I mean, I think, not even think I know, but one of the reasons for me to make O'Neal a primary character, because I really wanted to show the dangers of being apolitical, you know what I'm saying? And we made this movie in 2019, you know, obviously 2020 happens, and I don't think many people came out of 2020 apolitical, right? But like, you know, I think it's still an important message to get across, just this idea of, you know, it's the old phrase, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. You know, William O'Neal's decision to really believe in nothing and invest in nothing other than, you know, essentially a capitalist ideology and culture, it didn't just, you know, crush, I hate to use the term crush a movement, but it really did. It really, really was deeply detrimental. You know, the Panthers remained active in Illinois till 1974 for 5 years after the assassination, but it was incredibly detrimental, not just to, you know, the Illinois chapter, but to the national chapter as a whole and to Chicago as a whole. Chicago would have been a different place if Fred Hampton lived. So his actions didn't just hurt those people, it hurt him. You look at how his story ends, you know, talking about a dude who in the 70s walked away with almost $200,000 in his pocket, damn near, the equivalent of that, had 2 phones in his car, you know what I mean, in the 70s. And he still took his own life at 40 years old, right. You know, he still didn't get a nice piece, you know what I mean? So
couldn't live with himself.
So he couldn't live with himself. So I think that there's value in putting that out there, you know, and I think there's just millions of things to it. You know, there's obviously highlighting the legacy of the Panthers, but it's also, I think, showing this country's history of, you know, repressing voices of dissent. You know, I think that, you know, like I said, on the part of Roy Mitchell, there's you know, an indictment of white centrism. I think there's a number of things you could take from this movie. It's a dense film. That's why I'm glad it's on HBO Max. People watch it 2 times and get something different out of it the second time, you know?
To your point, Shaka, you know, one thing that we like to say sometimes as Black people is that we are our own worst enemy, which sounds crazy, right? It sounds crazy to say William O'Neal was a worse enemy than these white extremists, COINTELPRO, the FBI that was trying to take the Panthers out. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's more so that it's not so much we're our worst enemy, but we can be weaponized against each other and weaponized against ourselves. Ultimately, William O'Neal, like, that's why we go through the pains we do to show you that William O'Neal is a sentinel of the FBI. You know, you're watching a movie and you see how not only is he manipulated and how he's used, but how the
He's a
FBI
pawn.
is using. He's a pawn. He's completely a pawn. You know, and so I'm careful about, you know, leading too much into the, you know, all skin folk and kinfolk of it all, because there's something bigger at play. You know, at the end of the day, the sad thing is that both William O'Neill and Fred Hampton desired the same things. They desired freedom and power, but they had different definitions of what those things were, and they had different ways of going about attaining them, you know. But they both were ultimately, that's the crazy thing, is that they were actually fighting against the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know what I wanted to ask you just about yourself personally, going to a school like Poly Prep and being in Bay Ridge, and like you said, having cops make monkey noises at you, and then having to enter the world of Hollywood, where again, you had to deal with a lot of racism. How did you feel about white people growing up?
Oh my God. 5th to 12th. I mean, it was crazy because I didn't meet a white person my age till I think 5th grade, right? Which is early for a lot of us. You know what I mean? Like, people don't realize how segregated New York is. Especially
I knew 2 white people my age until 7th grade when I went to Poly.
You know, so it was a culture shock, because you grow up watching white people on TV and you have one image of them, and you know the white people we met at Poly were totally different. Like, I didn't know any Greeks. I didn't know any Italians. I didn't know any Irish kids. I didn't see them on TV. I didn't know Hungarians. You know what I'm saying? And so that was a culture shock in a lot of ways. And then, you know, I did not have a good experience there, and I had to stay. My parents were not letting me leave.
You know, so I left. I was like, I can't do this anymore.
So like, I had a terrible time till, like, I remember in 8th grade when prep, that's when Prep for Prep starts letting, like, kids from Prep for Prep start coming to the private schools, and you end up having an influx of
I was
Black
in Prep for Prep. And Prep for Prep, for people listening, is a program that takes kids from urban areas, Black and Latino kids, and puts them in private schools that are predominantly white.
Those are my best friends to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Because they saved me. You know what I'm saying? I was losing it, and I did it, and it wasn't like they saved me automatically. I went through like a solid 2 to 3 years with them there, but I was still just like struggling. I didn't figure, and it was because I just was not in the right environment. And, you know, eventually I figured it out and course corrected, and it was good training. I'm glad this shit happened to me younger than it did later. I know people who, you know, they didn't really enter largely white spaces until, you know, college or after college. And they struggle. It's just so many, it can go so many ways. People lose their sense of self. People, you know, it can take an incredible toll on your psyche. And I'm glad that I got that out of the way as a young person, so that I could enter Hollywood and not take from that I'm not enough. You know what I'm saying? That I'm not good enough. That it's my fault. That damn, maybe I'm not that good at making movies. Maybe, you know, and like I couldn't help but feel that way at a certain point early in my career. But I was able to course correct me, like, wait a minute. Good, think back. Like, remember all that you've gone through. Remember what your father went through. Remember what your grandfather went through. Remember that they've been telling you forever, like, you got to work a trillion times as hard for a quarter of the slice. You know what I mean? It's not you. It's just it's just the way things are. So you got to move through that. And remember that you're resilient enough, and you come from like the most resilient people in the world, that you can't be stopped, you know?
I got 2 more questions for you. And what you just said kind of leads into it. I saw you in an interview, and I'm going to read the quote. You said, "Maybe I was naive at the time, but I thought that a film about a Black Panther produced by Ryan Coogler of a superhero movie that grossed over $1 billion, a finance to Charles King, who had committing to put up half the budget, and 2 of the best young Black actors working today starring, that studios would be lining up. But it was a surprise to me when things didn't play out that way." So my question is, did Hollywood fail to support this film?
No, I would say no, just because we found the distributor we were supposed to find. You know, I think I'd be singing a different tune if they all passed. But Warner Brothers didn't, and they were an incredible partner in making the movie. I anticipated, just hearing all I've heard about movie studios since I've, you know, gotten this business, that, you know, there would be attempts to whitewash the film. There would be attempts to, you know, make Fred Hampton a liberal or make Roy Mitchell a likable character. I had my guard up. You know, I was afraid that it would get taken from me at some point and I would be left out of the edit. All of the horror stories you hear, and I just did not have that experience whatsoever. But I do think that part of that has to do with the fact that, you know, Hollywood doesn't have a lot of Black executives at a high level. Warner Brothers has a woman named Nija Kuykendall, who I've actually known since I was like in college, who's one of the few Black executives at her, you know, at her level. And she'd been trying to make a movie about I found this out after the fact. She'd been trying to make a movie about the Black Panthers at Warner Brothers for almost a decade. So it doesn't surprise me that that was the studio that was interested in moving forward with us, because they'd been primed over years. They'd read scripts. It wasn't like they had zero context, and they could see, I think, the commercial value of making a movie like this because of her. And for me, that is proof of the need. Like, if people want to see real change in Hollywood, that's why you have to see a change at the executive level. You need not just Black executives, you know, at a high level, but you also need Black executives who have a connection to their history and their communities and are interested in telling, you know, stories for their people the way that Nija is. And so, yeah, I don't lose sight of that. And I deeply appreciate her, you know, being there, because I do think that did play a role. I mean, Warner Brothers also has incredible executives who are good at their jobs. So that, I think, helps too, you know. But I do think she really helped lay the groundwork. You know?
And I know that you initially set out, from what I heard, to tell the story of the entire Black Panther Party. So how did you end up zeroing in on Fred?
Yeah, well, it wasn't. We were trying to, when we first started researching, my co-writer Will Burson and I, we just discovered all of these incredible individuals within the party, within the Illinois chapter specifically, that it felt like a shame to, you know, not acknowledge their contribution and their heroism, you know, because the thing about the Panthers is that they were not only, you know, they had a socialist hierarchy. So they were willing to die because they knew that that they were replaceable. You know what I'm saying? It was like, everybody is a leader in here. There are no followers in here. And so we're reading about people like Doc Satchel, who was instrumental in, you know, forming the medical clinic, and Rhonda Ross, who ran the breakfast program, you know, and Che Brooks, who was the Minister of Education, who are all people who, you know, we felt deserved to be highlighted alongside Fred. But then, you know, you can't get the script under 200 pages. Mm-hmm. And you can't get the movie made. You know what I mean?
And it's like, it's just, characters developed the way. Yeah.
You can't, and it's just like, that's when you go, this needs a limited series. That's when you go, this needs a limited series.
Now you do. And Shaka, one thing I will say, you need a series with the women, because the women were so powerful, and I appreciated the respect that they wanted to make sure that the women within the organization were shown at all times. You know, you see the part where he's trying to kick it and they're like, hold up. And he had to do those push-ups, like stop harassing these women, but also just how powerful the women were in the Black Panthers. And I feel like that's a series in itself.
Agree. I agree 100%. You know, mm-hmm. I know the things about the movie that I know the shortcomings of the movie. You know what I mean? One of them is that I think is probably too much story in terms of the history of the chapter to include to make a 2-hour film. So we had to be strategic about the way that we told this narrative and weave this narrative. It was really challenging. I mean, there's a million challenges you know. Yeah.
Well, I think y'all did a great job, man. I think it's a phenomenal film. I've watched it twice. Like I think it's one of those ones for a generation. You know how when you was, I'm 42. I don't know how old you are, but when we was younger, you know, you watched the autobiography of Malcolm X. You like, wow, I gotta know. I want to know more about the nation. I want to know more about, you know, Malcolm, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I think y'all definitely created one of those. Personally, that's how I feel.
Thank you. That was the goal. To me, that's the blueprint in terms of biopics and in terms of, I remember how I felt leaving the theater as a kid watching Malcolm X.
Word.
Yeah.
I remember, I read the autobiography because my parents had me on that young, you know, but I reread it a million times after that movie.
Word.
And it's the blueprint in my opinion. It really is. I
read it once a year. I think we should start calling movies like that. And we should start calling movies like Judas and the Black Messiah. We should start calling these types of movies propaganda, because the proper stories are being told.
I love that.
But thank you, Shaka, so much for making time for us. Judas and the Black Messiah is available now. So make sure you guys stream that however you have to watch it. It's on HBO Max, right?
Yep. HBO Max and in theater same day. Yeah.
Shaka, thank you, brother. I hope you get the opportunity to tell more of our stories, man, because you did a great job.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Y'all so much. Thank you.
Peace.